Welcome back to Community Church, kind of. We're online again. If you're new to our little online community, you probably can guess this is not normally how we do things, but because of the situation right now in our world, we've had to kind of change the plan a little bit. My name is Lou. I'm one of the pastors here, and I'm really glad that you've joined us online. We would love to connect with you. And if you want to connect with us, you can go to communitychurch.net/connect. And there's a little form on there. If you fill that out, that will help you stay up to date with what we're doing. We'd also love to send you a little gift in the mail. It's nothing crazy, but it's kind of fun. If this is the church that you call home and you partner with us financially and you want to continue to do that, especially because we're not meeting in person, now is a great time to switch to doing it online. You can help support our church at communitychurch.net/give. But if you're new to this whole thing, please don't feel any pressure to give. We are just glad that you tuned in to our service. So here's the rundown for this morning in our little quarantine community. Easter Sunday's coming up. That is one of, if not the biggest Sundays on the church calendar. And you probably can guess, this year it's going to look a little different. But because we don't even know what the world's going to look like in 2 weeks, we've got kind of a few plans in place. Some are a little bit more exciting than others, but either way, we're going to try and do something fun, so make sure you mark your calendar for Easter Sunday. That's in 2 weeks. So as you could probably imagine, the whole church, not Community Church, but Big C, like worldwide church, all of us have had to switch to moving things online. What that means is that Sunday morning, servers are super overloaded, and you might have experienced that the past 2 weeks with us. But every week, what we also try to do is have our service on YouTube. And YouTube is like a monster in terms of the load that it can handle. So probably YouTube is never going to go down. Now watch, this week it'll go down. But either way, if you subscribe to our YouTube channel, then if our website isn't working and you can't watch it in our little web app, then you can go straight to YouTube and tune in there. Along similar lines, last week we tried to try something new called Church.online. And the whole idea of that is that you're taking the service that everybody's watching, but you're watching it at the same time and you can interact with each other. There's a little chat. It's pretty cool. Well, it was a horrible failure. You couldn't even load the page last week because so many people were on it. But they sent us an email this week apologizing, saying that everything was overloaded, and they promised that things are going to work this week. We'll see. But we're going to try it again. So if you want to tune in this week, Sunday at 10:30. Sunday at 10:30. I think that's going to be our new time. Probably the traffic will be a little bit less than it would be at 11 o'clock. Sunday at 10:30. Community.online.church. Same service, but with a bunch of people. I think it'll be pretty cool. With everything constantly changing right now in our world, our plans are constantly changing. And so the best way for you to keep up with what we're doing is to follow us on Facebook or on Instagram. It's facebook.com/communitychurch.li. Same thing on Instagram. Instagram.com/communitychurch.li. So also in the world of social media, we're a brand new church, right? We're less than 4 months old. And you may not realize this, but it is a huge help to us anytime you share something that we post, or if you post something and tag us in it. So obviously we don't want you to feel any pressure, but if it's something that you're comfortable doing, it is a big time help to us as a church. So obviously there are some things that really stink about not meeting in person, like not having coffee from the Babylon Bean and not getting to see those people that you really love. But there are also some really cool things about doing everything through video. Like, I don't know if you've noticed, but Tom has appeared playing the drums at some point, kind of in ghost form, at some point in the last 2 weeks. And this week we're going to have a little fun with it. So here's how we're going to do that. This week, at some point in the video, he's going to appear in ghost form. Might be big, might be small, might be on the bottom, might be on the top. I don't know. But at some point, he's going to appear. And the first 10 people to go to communitychurch.net/connect and fill out that form and then put the time of the video that he appears. I put that time in the form somewhere. You will get a gift card this week in the mail. And it's only Tom on the drums, not Tom singing. We see Tom singing all the time. It's way less exciting. Just kidding. That's all I've got for you guys. I know the past couple weeks have been difficult, more difficult for some than for others, but we miss you, we love you, we are praying for you every single day. And of course, as always, don't ever hesitate to contact us or me personally if there's something you need or some way we can serve you. So I hope you enjoy this morning's online service, and until we meet again in person, have a great week.
grateful for sunshine and walks outside.
Coffee.
For a good glass of wine.
Food and snacks.
Really cheap lobster.
My big sister.
The heather once was crowned with thorns, is crowned with glory now. The Savior knelt to wash our feet, and now at His feet we bow. The one who wore our sin and shame, now robed in majesty, the radiance of perfect love now shines for all to see. Your name is victory. All praise will rise to Christ our King. Your name is victory. All praise will rise to Christ our King. The fear that held us now gives way to Him who is our peace. His final breath upon the cross is now alive in me.
Peace that I feel.
Grateful for mom's patience.
My wife.
Or being able to be social over Xbox.
A husband I don't mind being stuck in the house with.
All the extra time I get to spend with my kids.
By His Spirit I will rise from the ashes of defeat. The resurrected King is resurrecting me. In Your name I come alive to declare Your victory. The resurrected King is resurrecting me. Resurrecting me. In Your name I come alive to declare Your victory. The resurrected King is resurrecting me. The tomb where soldiers watched in vain was borrowed for 3 days. His body there would not remain. Our God has robbed the grave. Our God has robbed the
Sing Your name. Your name is victory. And all praise will rise to Christ
Well, if you were with us last week, you know that we pressed pause on our story series to talk about what we called the realization of uncertainty, or the reason you can't buy toilet paper. But today we are jumping back into our story series, and we're looking at the whole idea of this story, the whole idea of this series, rather, is to look at the power of stories, the power that stories have to shape us. So before we jump into today's story, I'll tell you my own little story. So when I was in college, I was dating this girl. Her name was Allie. It went really well. And one night, I had to drive her back home. We had just gone out on a date, and I was driving her back to her dorm. And there was this red light. And so I was approaching the light, and I had to make a right on the red. So I slowed down cautiously, but then I turned, and I didn't come to a complete stop. So sure enough, there was a cop there, and he pulls me over. He sees my bright yellow New York license plate, and we were in the South, so they just love to get us up there. And he pulls me over, and I get a ticket, and tells me I got to go to court in a couple weeks. So I go to court, and it was terrifying. There's a judge in the front of the room, and then there's all of us like criminals sitting there waiting for our names to be called so we could beg for mercy. And he calls me up. I get up there, and I see the cop that had pulled me over. And I look at him, and it's like, we meet again. So I get up there, and the judge looks at me, and he says, do you have any comments? And I was told, that is when I get to beg for mercy. I tell my story. So I said, yeah, well, I was driving my girlfriend back for curfew, and I wanted to get her back on time, so I was in a little bit of a rush. I'd rehearsed this like 50 times. And I came to this red light, and I'm not excusing what I did because I know that I broke the law. And I didn't come to a complete stop at the red light. And then at that moment, I hear the cop next to me inhale like he's going to say something, and I'm like, oh boy, here it comes, right? And he goes, Your Honor, in his defense, there really was nobody on the road. And I looked at him like, really? Now we're friends, you know? You could have saved us both the trip, just let me off that night and everything would have been great. But I was glad he stood up for me. And it turns out the judge let me off the hook. He told me to take an online course. I didn't get a ticket. Fantastic. I was thrilled. Really glad the guy came through for me. But here's the thing. Think about this. I probably could have stopped that story at the point where I walked into the courtroom, and you knew probably that I was going to ask for mercy, that I was going to ask to be let off the hook. Think about it. Has there ever been a time where you're caught red-handed, where you know you're wrong? Maybe you broke somebody's trust, or maybe you did something you know you shouldn't do, but you've done something and there's no excuse for it, and it's time to pay the piper. You've got to talk to the person you've wronged, or the friend you've wronged, or your parent, or your boss, or whoever, and you just kind of got to own it. Isn't it amazing? Isn't it amazing how there is just something instinctive inside of us that makes us beg for mercy? Like every single time I think I've ever gotten in trouble, I've tried to get off the hook. Just ask my parents. We want exceptions to be made for us when we've done something wrong. It's human nature. It's impulsive. There's nobody that gets up there that goes up to the judge and says, hello, Your Honor, I'm guilty. Please punish me to the fullest extent of the law. In fact, even when people plead guilty, it's usually because they think that is their greatest chance of getting mercy or being let off the hook or given a lesser sentence. But now think about this. Isn't it interesting how when the shoe is on the other foot, if you flip the situation around, if you've ever been wronged, maybe someone lied to you, maybe someone betrayed you, maybe someone broke your trust, or maybe someone hurt you, or in those situations, maybe somebody cut you off in traffic, or maybe somebody cut in front of you at the grocery store, online, when there's a shortage anyway, right? In those situations, what do we want? We want justice. When we've been wronged, we want justice. But when we're wrong, we want mercy. You ever drive down the highway, right? Maybe you're in the left lane, maybe you're going at decent speed, but all of a sudden, out of nowhere, there comes a guy just whoosh, flying by you. And whenever that happens, I feel the need to tell everybody in the car, to look at this person. I'm like, look at this guy, flying, but and it's just, there's part of me that just is filled with rage and fury when somebody does that. And then every once in a while, a couple minutes later, I'll see ahead on the highway, whether it's the expressway or I-95 or whatever, I'll see some lights, and I'm thinking, oh, and then I like pull up, and it's him. And it is this moment of glory, like sweet justice. This person who wronged me got what he deserved, and it is just incredibly satisfying. Isn't it interesting how we are so slow to give what we are so quick to ask for? Well, the story that we're looking at today is going to address that exact issue. And what I think you'll find is that the principle that Jesus pulls out with this story is extremely helpful when it comes to showing people mercy. So here's the situation. Jesus is with these guys, his friends, what we call the disciples. They're the people that basically just followed him around and tried to learn from everything that he did and said. These people, they loved him. And one of the guys, his name is Peter. And Peter is, you might have heard of him, he's the impulsive one. He's the one who's always like saying exactly what's on his mind. And sometimes it's glorious and he says the perfect thing, and other times it's horrible and he says absolutely the wrong thing and makes a complete fool of himself. But I kind of like this guy. He's kind of just rides the impulse, you know? And here he's in a situation, and Jesus is talking about dealing with difficult people. How to deal with people who have wronged you. Now, I'm sure you probably don't have any difficult people in your life, but I have a few in my life, so I kind of find this whole situation helpful. And he's talking about how to handle them. And you can probably guess Jesus kind of comes back to the idea of forgiveness, of forgiving people, of letting go when somebody wrongs you. And so right away, Peter, probably thinking of all the people that get on his nerves, he speaks up and he's got a question right away. And again, I love this guy, super honest. He says to Jesus, Lord, how many times shall I forgive my brother and sister? Then he throws a number out there. He says, up to 7 times? Now, if you're reading that, you might be like, weird, why 7, right? Kind of a random number. But in that culture, the number 7 kind of represented something that was whole, something that was complete. So what Peter's expecting Jesus to do here is kind of give him a pat on the back and be like, you got it, Peter. 7 times, great job. That's the answer. He's expecting a gold star on the chart chart. What he's saying is, Jesus, so in general, you want us to be the kind of people that lean toward forgiving, up to 7 times. That's a lot of times. You ever have somebody wrong you 7 times? It's like enough already, right? And Peter's saying, that's how many times I should do it? Lean toward forgiving people, be a kind of like a forgiving person. And Jesus, again, just kind of says something that nobody's really expecting. Instead of giving Peter the pat on the back that Peter's expecting, Jesus says, I tell you, not 7 times, but 77 times. Some translations there say 7 times 70 times. It's kind of difficult to translate the numbers there in the original language. But he's not saying, I want you to forgive 490 times. He's saying, Peter, I want you to take that idea and just multiply it by a ton. And if I'm Peter, I'm sitting there like, okay, like what does that look like, right? So of course, Jesus seizes the opportunity and decides he's going to tell a story that's going to make this abstract principle of forgiving someone 490 times and making it concrete, right? So here's what he says. He says, therefore, in light of the question you just asked, the kingdom of heaven is like a king who wanted to settle accounts with his servants. This was normal. Often, kings would have servants, which were really more like employees who worked for him, and he would trust them with his money, with his stuff, and they would take care of it. They would manage it. Sometimes they'd have people under them, but they've got stuff that is the king's, and it's their job to take care of it. So, it's time to settle the accounts. See, okay, what'd you do with what I gave you? And it says, as he began the settlement, a man who owed him 10,000 bags of gold was brought to him. 10,000 bags of gold. Now, I don't know how many bags of gold you have, but I don't have any. The idea here in the original language, instead of bags of gold, it says talents. Now, a talent, that was their currency. A talent was the amount of money you would probably make after working about 20 years. So Jesus says that a man owes this king 10,000 talents. He is like basically, so some of the most like theological academic scholars on this passage says it's basically like Jesus is saying, okay, the guy owes the king $1 gazillion. It's an amount that he couldn't ever possibly make up in a lifetime. And so the picture here is not of somebody who is fallen on hard times or of somebody who's made a mistake. The picture is of somebody who has just been absolutely, recklessly irresponsible with someone else's stuff. So when I was in school, when I was in college, my freshman year, I had a car on campus. It was my first car. It was a 1997 Jeep Grand Cherokee, and I loved it. It was like my first child. And I had this friend who was in our friend group. We weren't super close, but, we were friendly. And he really liked this girl. He wanted to ask her out, and I'm rooting for him. We've had these talks late at night where I'm like, well, maybe you could talk to her like this, or maybe you can slide into the DMs on Facebook, right? And we're talking about how he can, tell this girl that he likes her. And I've been with him through the whole journey, right? Really rooting for him, really want the best for him. Eventually he does it. She says yes, he's going to take her out on a date. And Valentine's Day comes around, and he says, hey, Lou, I really want to take my girlfriend out on a date. I'm so excited, but I don't have a car. Can I borrow your car? And when he asked me, right away, I'm like, you know that feeling, like that uncomfortable feeling, like you really don't want to, but you feel like you probably should. I love this thing. I didn't like letting people drive it. I did not give it to people to borrow when I wasn't there. Plus, my dad's an insurance agent, and I knew he wasn't going to be thrilled with the whole idea of this. But I'm really rooting for the guy, and I want him to have a good time. So I was like, okay, here. And I just hand him over my keys. I remember the moment, where I just gave him the keys. I was like, take care of my child, right? So I gave it to him on a Friday. And Monday, I see him in our little dining hall. We called it the Rot. I see him in the dining hall, and he comes up to me, and he gives me the keys. He's got a big smile on his face. He's like, hey, thanks so much. The car was great. Oh, by the way, I just got to let you know, the car is really, really dirty. There's dirt on the outside. There's mud on the inside. The carpets are kind of soaked in mud. But don't worry, I'm gonna clean it. I just haven't gotten to it yet. And he's telling me this, and it's not making sense to me because I'm thinking, no, you just took your girlfriend out for Valentine's Day. Why would my car be dirty? I don't even think that it rained that weekend. And I was like, well, what do you mean? Why is it so dirty? And he goes, well, I took my girlfriend out. We went out on Valentine's Day. Turns out the date went really well, by the way. But then after he took his girlfriend out, he decided he was going to take the guys in his dorm out off-roading in my Jeep. They were going to go mudding. And so they went through all these trails in the woods, and at one point, the car actually got stuck in a pit. And so it got really muddy, and they're trying to pull it out, and they're getting mud soaked into the carpets, and the tires are spinning. So they had to call his friend, who also has a truck, and thankfully, they were able to pull it out of the pit because the other guy had a rope. And I'm sitting there, and he's explaining this to me, and it's just not making sense. I'm starting to twitch, and there's this, just feeling inside me, there's steam, smoke coming out of my ears. There's, fire in my eyeballs, and I don't even know what to say. So I just kind of shook my head, and I took the keys, and then I walked back to my table, and I ate my lunch. About 10 minutes later, I figured out how I wanted to articulate what I needed to say, and I went and I told him, which is a different story for another time. You could tell I'm over it. But the picture there is I gave you something of mine, and you were just recklessly irresponsible, no regard for what it means to take care of what I've trusted you with, right? And that's the picture here that Jesus is painting of a guy who we don't know how much he was given with to start, but he was trusted with probably a significant amount of money, and he just goes and he absolutely does not, are you kidding me, care 10,000 talents of debt he owes the king. So it's time to settle the accounts, right? It's time to give him the keys back. And Jesus says, since he was not able to pay, of course he wasn't able to pay, nobody would have been able to pay, the master ordered that he and his wife and his children and all that he had be sold to repay the debt. Now, back then in the Roman Empire, servants and slaves, that was a really common thing. In fact, the majority of the population would have considered them a servant or a slave. It's not like the concept of slavery we have here in our country. Back then, it was way more voluntary. You actually could sell yourself into slavery to make money or to pay off a debt. And so he's just selling him and his services and his family as a way to kind of get back some of what he's lost. And it says, at this, when he hears what the king is going to do to him, the servant fell on his knees before him. He says, "Be patient with me," he begs, "and I'll pay back everything." What Jesus is doing here with this request, remember, he's making up the story. He's just further reinforcing how foolish the guy is. Now he's making a promise. By saying he's going to pay back everything, he's making a promise that there's no way he's going to keep. He doesn't need more time. He doesn't need the king to be patient. He needs a miracle. And here's where the story takes a twist. Like, this is the shocking moment in the story. It says, the servant's master, the king, took pity on him, canceled the debt, and let him go. Like, this is crazy. This is crazy. The man asked for more time to pay back the debt. The king, knowing he wasn't going to get his money back, could have said, okay, I will give you more time to try and pay back the debt. He could have said, I'll give you the rest of your life to try and pay back the debt, and you do the best that you can. Even knowing that the guy wasn't going to be able to pay him back, the guy's offering to go to work for him. And instead, the king cancels it. The guy has been recklessly irresponsible with what he's been trusting with, and the king shows him this radical sense of mercy. Now, I don't know about you, but this whole idea of pity for me, when I think of pity, I think of someone pathetic. You know, like, oh, you just give them your pity, like, fine. Letting someone pathetic off the hook. And while this guy is kind of painted as a pathetic person, and while he is let off the hook, the word there for pity is the idea of mercy. If you dig a little bit deeper, you see that the idea of mercy is this concept of engaging your emotions and feeling for somebody, and then allowing your actions to follow those feelings. He's setting aside fault, setting aside how that person got in that situation, and decides to feel for him. He stops and he thinks, okay, what is it like to owe someone 10,000 talents? That's probably overwhelming. What's it like to be on your face begging for the future of your kids and your wife, your family, of everything you owe? Like, what's it like to be in that? Set aside the fault, and what's it like to be there? That's got to be horrible. And his emotions move him to cancel the debt. And what Jesus is explaining here is like, listen, there is a God who stops and he feels for you. Like, he engages your emotion. He engages his emotions. He sets aside fault, sets aside how you got there, sets aside whether you're responsible for the pain you're feeling or not, and he enters into that pain with you. And that's what leads him to act the way that he does. It's a picture here of over-the-top, life-changing, radical mercy. And that's the picture that Jesus is painting of God's behavior, God's feelings toward us. But the story doesn't end there. Our servant has his debt canceled, right? This has got to be like the best day of his life. You know, you ever had a debt, even if you pay back the debt's gone. It's this feeling like you're just so light. You know, if you know Dave Ramsey, he has people, whenever they pay off a debt, they do a debt-free scream because it feels so good. Maybe this guy is doing the Dave Ramsey debt-free scream. I don't know. But he's probably really happy. He's walking home, getting ready to go tell his wife the good news. I love when I'm going home and I have good news to tell my wife. I love it. And on the way home, I rehearse. Okay, how am I going to tell her? Maybe I'll tell her some bad news that's not real. Then I'll tell her it's not true. I'll tell her the good news. Bring her really low, then bring her back up again. She hates it, but I love it. Best way. It's fun to deliver good news. Maybe, if I'm that guy, I'm thinking about how am I going to deliver this great news that this $10,000 debt we have has just been canceled. Not only that we're not going to be sold, but that it's been canceled. Okay, so he's going home. He's on his way. But he doesn't get home. He meets somebody on the way. It says, but when that servant went out, he found one of his fellow servants he had somebody either who worked with him or who worked for him. And this guy owed him 100 silver coins. Now, again, it's kind of hard to say exactly how much that was, but it was way, way, way less. So he sees him, and all of a sudden he's reminded of what this guy owes him. So he grabs him, and he begins to choke him. He says, "Pay back what you owe me." He demands that he gets what he deserves. His fellow servant, ready? His fellow servant fell to his knees and begged him. Remember this picture? He says, "Be patient with me, and I will pay it back." Now, this is realistic. He probably could work it off. He probably get 100 silver coins. He probably could pay that back. And it's the picture here. Now, the shoe's on the other foot. And now there's someone begging for his mercy. It says, but he refused. Instead, he went off and he had the man thrown into prison until he could pay the debt. Isn't it amazing? Isn't it amazing that what we are so quick to need, we are so slow to give? Right? If there's anybody who should know what it's like to need mercy, it should be this guy. He literally just needed it 5 minutes ago. He didn't even get home yet, and he's already forgotten. It says, when the other servants saw what had happened, they were outraged, and they went and told their master. They went back and told the king everything that had happened. Then the master called the servant in. "You wicked servant," he said. "I canceled all that debt of yours because you begged me to. Shouldn't you have had mercy on your fellow servant just as I had on you?" In his anger, his master handed him over to the jailers to be tortured until he should pay back all he owed. Of course, we know he wasn't going to be able to pay back what he owed. Now, the picture there, the point of the story is not that God is going to torture you if you don't forgive people. Jesus is getting at something bigger here. He's talking about what's going on in the human heart. The punchline of this story is in the king's explanation. The question that he asks is, shouldn't you have shown mercy as I have shown you? Remember, he doesn't say, shouldn't you have forgiven? Shouldn't you have just let him off the hook? He talks about what happens before forgiveness. And if you struggle with forgiving people, this is really what's at the heart of forgiving. Remember, this idea of mercy, it has this idea of engaging your emotions, of stopping, of setting aside fault, of setting aside how that person got there and feeling for him. He's saying, shouldn't you have stopped and felt for him, stopped and thought about, what does it feel like to beg for your future? What does it feel like to have a debt that you owe someone? And if you would have stopped, you would have remembered, oh, I was just in that situation. I literally just felt that. He's saying, shouldn't you have just pressed pause and taken a walk in that person's shoes? And it's amazing if we stop and just feel like, okay, what's it like I know that they're wrong, but if I set aside fault and just think like, what's it like to be in that person's situation? It is amazing how we can be moved to cancel debt. It's amazing how our hearts can be moved to forgiveness if we just stop and feel for people. And he's saying, shouldn't you have done that? But you didn't. You didn't. And so he doesn't forgive the guy. And the question then is why? If you look at this story and if you look at our lives, why is it so hard to give what we are so quick to need? Why are we so slow to give the mercy that we are so quick to ask for? And the reason why, I think it comes down to two things. The first reason, I think the first thing Jesus wants us to see is that he's blind. He is blind to his lack of mercy. Isn't it amazing? Isn't it amazing that all his fellow workers, it says they were outraged that he didn't forgive the guy, that owed him 100 silver coins. They were outraged. They all see it. They're like, are you kidding me? If there's anybody here who should be able to see, who should be able to feel, it's you. You're the one. You were just in that situation. And yet he's totally blind to it. And if you stop and you think for a minute, like, think about how many things get on our nerves. Think about how many things like that really bother you, you are also guilty of. In fact, we know, like research has shown us, that the field of psychology has shown us that the things that get us the most angry when we see in other people are things that we hate most in ourselves. So if I really struggle with pride, right? If I always need to be the center of attention, then when I see somebody who wants to be the center of attention, that's the thing that gets me the angriest because I hate that about myself. Or if I'm really jealous, a really jealous person, then when I see jealousy in other people, that's what really lights a fire within me. What's amazing is that we get most angry at the things we are most guilty of most of the time. We are blind. We are blind to our lack of mercy. And if we would stop, like if I struggle again with anger, right? And I see someone getting angry and right away I want justice for that person because he got angry and because I hate that about myself. But if we would stop and be like, you know what? Stop and feel for that person. Be like, you know what? I struggle with that. And I know what he's going through right now. And I know he probably hates that about himself. And I know he doesn't want to do what he's about to do, but there is something about it that he just can't beat. Like, I just can't beat. And if we stop and feel, maybe the way that we act toward that person would be different than if we didn't take the time to stop and show mercy. Not stop and just forgive, not stop and just not care about what he's doing, but stop and intentionally think, what is it like to be in that person's situation? But we're blind to it. We're blind to it. We can't see our own lack of mercy. I remember when my daughter was first born. My daughter's my oldest. It was our first child. I remember leaving the hospital. And I was taking this girl, this like new baby life that I had, and we put her in the car seat, and I was like terrified. I didn't know how to hold her. I didn't know anything, and I got to drive her home now. And I've never been so insecure in my driving ability. I love to drive all the time. I have this new baby in the back of the car. I'm like, holy cow, I don't know what I'm doing. And I'm sitting there, and I'm driving with like my hands like with this death grip on the steering wheel. And I come to this intersection with this new baby in the back seat, and I've got to make a left. And there's cars coming, and I got to wait for an opening. And I'm sitting there, and I'm like, and I'm questioning everything because I'm so intimidated by this new life that's in the back seat. And there were some openings that were large enough that I probably could have gone, normally would have gone, but I didn't because I was so hesitant. And there's people behind me. And I'm looking in the rear view mirror and I'm thinking like, okay, they're getting irritated, right? I can hear everything they're saying. Like, right, you want a written invitation? Would you get your license in a gumball machine, Cracker Jack box? Whatever you're saying is right. I'm hearing it in my head and I see them getting annoyed. They're giving me the, come on, you kidding? Look, right? Like, right? And I'm watching it. And what I want to tell them is you can't see what's in my car. You don't know what I'm feeling right now. You can't see my situation. If you knew I was a new dad that all of a sudden forgot how to drive, you'd be like, oh, poor guy. He's scared. He's got his little girl's in the back seat. He's got to make a left. Let me give him a break. Let me take a deep breath. I'm probably not in that much of a rush. But we are blind. We often make judgments that we have no business making. Because we don't know what's going on. You don't know why that barista that you had this morning was so cranky, right? Maybe they just lost somebody they loved. Maybe they just got a diagnosis they weren't expecting. Maybe they've been hurt in a way that you can't wrap your mind around. But we don't know because we can't see inside the car. We can't see inside the heart. And maybe if we would just stop for a minute and recognize the fact that we're blind. We can't see the whole picture. Maybe we would be slower to demand justice for people, and maybe a little bit quicker to give mercy. The second reason is that we're right. We're right. We often don't show mercy because we're right and the person who wants mercy is wrong. Think about it. Think about this story. Imagine you only hear about Act 2 in the story. There's a man, and he's walking home, and he encounters a guy who owes him 100 silver coins. And what does he do? He demands that he gets his money back. If you only see that story, you're like, yeah, the guy owes him money. He should pay up. What's the deal? The reality of our situation right now is that our quarantine situation is that you might be locked up with somebody that you are slow to give mercy to. Maybe, probably one of those people is your spouse. Maybe it's your teenage daughter, your teenage son, or somebody you are just not into giving mercy to. It is extremely difficult for you to give mercy to them. And maybe the issue is that you are right, and that's why you are slow to stop and feel for people, because you feel like they don't deserve it. But isn't it amazing? Isn't it amazing how in our story we have a guy who is totally right? He's totally right. But because there's a king in his story, because he's been forgiven a crazy amount of stuff, the people that look on are outraged. They are outraged that he would demand that his debt is paid to him. Why? Because when we see radical mercy, our standard of ethics actually changes based on what happens before an event, right? It's kind of interesting if you think about it, but what normally would be like, oh yeah, that's right, he was owed money, he should demand his money back. All of a sudden, our standard totally changes when we know that this guy was forgiven an incredible amount. We expect mercy to lead to more mercy. We're like, oh no, hold on a second. And the people, including us, are outraged. They're like, how could you not show mercy when you've shown mercy? Why? Because there's a king in his story. There's a king in his story. My question for you, especially if you're somebody who's been in church for a while, if you're a regular churchgoer, if you're somebody who considers themselves a follower of Jesus, do you live like there's a king in your story? Do you live like there is somebody who has stopped, looked at you, set aside your fault, set aside how you got to your broken place, and chose to feel for you anyway? That's the story of what we call the gospel, the good news about Jesus. That God looked at us and set aside what we've done wrong, and he feels for us, he loves us, and he cancels our debt. If we live like there's a king in our story, it will lead us to stop and engage our emotions with those difficult people in our lives, with the difficult people that we're locked up with. And if you're new to this, if you're not somebody who follows Jesus, the good news is that there's a king. There is a king in your story. There's a God. Maybe right now you're feeling a sense of loneliness, a sense of hopelessness, a sense of uncertainty that is eating you alive. There's a God who has not forgotten you, a God who cares about you, a God that stops and feels for you, enters into your loneliness. And if you feel inadequate, if you feel like I haven't done enough, or I haven't gone to enough things, or I haven't made my this or made my that, like I don't measure, like he has totally set aside that debt, and he treats you, he sees you as one of his children, a child that he loves. He invites you into a relationship. So that's what I want to leave you with. Most of us are in quarantine right now. Most of us are stuck home. And I bet, like you don't have to go far to find somebody who's going to annoy you. But my hope for you is that if someone is getting on your nerves, that you'll just stop. Maybe you need to walk away from the situation, but maybe you'll just stop and think, okay, what is it like to be going through what they're going through right now? What's it like? How are they handling this uncertainty? What's it like for them to be ripped out of school? What's it like for him to want so badly to be able to provide for us and yet be totally uncertain about whether or not he's going to be able to go to work? What's it like for her to have to teach to homeschool our kids every single day and do something she never thought she was going to have to do? What feelings of inadequacy, what like levels are her patience being pushed through? What's it like to feel what she's feeling? And what I promise you is that if we stop to engage our emotions, it will lead us to act in a totally different way. Maybe we'll be a little bit quicker to give what we are so quick to ask for.